Tonight at 10, we talk to the sprinter from Belarus who refuses to return home from the Olympic Games. Krystyna Tymanovskaya tells the BBC that she asked Poland for protection because of serious concerns for her safety.
I can't go back to Belarus now, of course. It's definitely not safe for me. I have no idea when I can go back. It may be 5 or 10 years.
During the day, the Belarus opposition leader held talks in Downing Street, urging the UK to put pressure on the ruling regime.
We are fighting for rule of law in our country, for democratic changes, and Mr. Johnson gave me to understand that they will be with us.
We'll be live in Belarus to ask how the widely criticised President Lukashenko is likely to respond. Also tonight, a tanker has been hijacked by armed men in the Gulf of Oman and ordered to sail to Iran. The number of drug-related deaths in England and Wales is at the highest level since records began.
Ricky's under pressure for the bronze, Hodgkinson the silver.
At the Olympics, a sensational silver for Team GB's Keely Hodgkinson, who's just 19, in the women's 800 metres.
Needs now this great dismount.
A great comeback by Simone Biles after struggling with mental health issues, taking a bronze in the beam final. And we'll be talking to Britain's youngest ever summer Olympian on the eve of her quest for gold.
And coming up in the sport on the BBC News channel, it's terrific Tuesday for Team GB in Tokyo as the sailors bring home the golds to cap Britain's best day at this Olympic Games.
Good evening. Krystyna Tymanovskaya, the sprinter from Belarus, has told the BBC that her country is not safe and she might not be able to go home for many years. She's been granted a humanitarian visa by Poland after officials from Belarus tried to send her home early from the Olympics against her will. The Belarus opposition leader, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, was in London today for talks with Boris Johnson. The Prime Minister said that the UK wanted to be clear in its support for the opponents of President Alexander Lukashenko, whose regime in Belarus has drawn worldwide criticism for its human rights abuses. Let's go live to Minsk, the capital of Belarus, joining our correspondent there, Sarah Rainsford.
Well, yes, there's been a whole series of events recently that have really refocused attention on the situation here in Belarus, almost exactly a year on now from those highly contested presidential elections and the mass street protests, of course, that followed. Now, since then, there has been a massive crackdown by the authorities in Belarus. Human rights groups talk of hundreds of political prisoners now in this country. Also, all the key opposition figures are either abroad, forced into exile, or in prison here in the country itself. And now even Olympic athletes are being swept up in it all. She's a young athlete thrust into a political row she never sought. When sprinter Krystyna Tymanovskaya publicly criticised her coaches at the Olympics, they tried to force her back to Belarus. She refused. Speaking to the BBC from Tokyo, she said she was now scared for herself and for her family.
I can't go back to Belarus now, of course. It's definitely not safe for me. I have no idea when I can go back. It may be 5 or 10 years.
And today came another reminder of the danger for dissidents. In Kiev, a young Belarusian activist was found hanging in a park, but his friends don't believe it was suicide. Vitaly Shishov fled to Ukraine last year to avoid arrest. He'd been helping a flood of other opposition supporters who followed. The opposition leader, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, is in forced exile herself.
Well, we're very, very pleased. I'm very pleased.
She's been in London, part of a tour seeking international support. She wants tougher measures, more sanctions against Alexander Lukashenko, the man she tried to topple as president.
This is our pain, Belarusian pain. We think that much more can be done. Much more pressure, much more assistance, braver decisions, stronger actions.
Since the disputed elections, the mood in Minsk has changed dramatically. Alexander Lukashenko now firmly back in control. A year ago, this entire square and all the streets around it were crammed full of protesters. It was opposition to President Alexander Lukashenko on a scale like he'd never seen before. But now there's no public sign at all of that challenge, because so many people have been arrested since then that the others have been scared into silence. Maria Kolesnikova was one of the faces of the protests, touring the country, rallying mass crowds. Tomorrow she goes on trial, accused of trying to overthrow the authorities. I met Maria's father outside her old flat. Alexander hasn't been allowed to see her since her arrest last September. But Maria writes from her cell every day to reassure him.
I know my daughter is not guilty, and she's so brave that I can't be anything but positive. She told me, whatever sentence I get, I'm ready for that. She writes to me all the time that we'll meet again soon, that everything will be okay.
But Belarus today feels anything but okay. Even our meeting is being monitored from the shadows. Now, Maria Kolesnikova is facing up to 12 years in prison in that trial that begins tomorrow. The trial itself will be held behind closed doors, and I think that's just one sign of how concerned the authorities are here, that anything could spark fresh protests, fresh unrest. They're desperate for that not to happen.
Sarah, many thanks once again for the latest there in Belarus. Sarah Rainsford in Minsk. Now, within the past hour, there have been reports of a tanker being hijacked by armed men in the Gulf of Oman and the vessel being ordered to sail to Iran. The Foreign Office here in London says it's urgently investigating. And with me is our security correspondent, Frank Gardner. Frank, what have you managed to learn about what's going on?
Well, Huw, the attack took place on the very congested waterway, right on the approach to the Strait of Hormuz, through which around a fifth of the world's maritime oil supplies pass through. Up to 9 heavily armed men are reported to have boarded the vessel and ordered it to sail to Iran. It's a bit of a mystery, though, because even though that's been confirmed by Lloyd's List Maritime Intelligence, the tracking agencies, the tracking data is showing it is moving very slowly, almost motionless, between Iran and Oman and the UAE. Now, Iran has been very quick to deny responsibility, saying that this is just mischief-making and being used as a pretext to carry out some hostile action. But it comes just 5 days after a fatal drone attack on another tanker off the coast of Oman, the Mercer Street, which killed a British security guard and a Romanian sailor. Britain, the US and Israel have all unanimously blamed Iran for that, which it denies. So quite a lot of tension in the region, a suspicion that as a new president takes office, there are hardliners trying to ratchet up the tension in the Gulf.
Frank, thank you again. Frank Gardner, our security correspondent there with the latest. Let's turn to the Olympics. It's been another outstanding day for Team GB at the Games in Japan. Sailing brought in 2 gold medals and a silver. The cyclists settled for silver in both the women's team pursuit and the men's team sprint. But that outcome means that Jason Kenny now has matched the record of the great Sir Bradley Wiggins as the most decorated British Olympian of all time. There were other medal-winning performances during the day. Our correspondent Natalie Perks brings us up to date in Tokyo.
Nautical perfection, sailing dominance. Britain were riding a crest of a wave. Dylan Fletcher and Stuart Bithell were in a great place in the men's 49er and just needed to beat the Germans in their final race. They literally put it all on the line.
Right on the line, Great Britain with it, the gold medal in Tokyo 2020.
But not to be outdone, Giles Scott was going in the Finn class, where Britain is superb. They've won gold at the last 5 games. But with just seconds remaining, Scott was cutting it fine.
And Giles Scott holds on to the gold medal in the dying moments of that race.
Talk about skin of your teeth. A quick plunge to celebrate, as back home there was delight.
She never ever watches his racing, and so for her to put herself through that is awesome. So we can only just say thank you, Giles, for delivering in the end. Although, as he said to us, at least you didn't have a heart attack.
And silver in the NACRA 17 topped off a wonderful day for Britain's sailors.
Well, 3 Britons in this final.
It had been 41 years since that last happened, but here were Gemma Reekie, Alex Bell and Keely Hodgkinson right in the mix.
And it's Great Britain, second and third. Hodgkinson now striding towards silver. Uthing-Moe away and clear to the gold medal. She's going to take it. And Hodgkinson, Reekie's under pressure for the bronze. Hodgkinson the silver.
At just 19, Hodgkinson's potent kick finish had propelled her onto the podium.
Well, that's Britain off the mark with their first medal in the Athletic Stadium, and that silver is Britain's first medal in this event since 2004.
And once the flag was round her shoulders, thoughts turned to those watching back home.
They put so much belief in me, because I did it.
What does this silver medal mean to you, Keely?
This, because I don't cry. My friends will be like, what's she crying for?
Dame Kelly Holmes was the last Briton to know success in this race. Her national record had stood for 26 years, till now.
I think there'll be young girls looking up at them now, and in years to come we'll see their legacy. But I'm just pleased to have played a part in the fact that I hope that I've inspired these 3 in particular, but anyone else, to do what I feel that they can do. And records are there to be broken.
From one track to another, Britain had won gold in the men's team sprint at the last 3 games, but for Jason Kenny, Jack Carlin and Ryan Owens, today it wasn't meant to be.
Gold for the Netherlands.
That silver, though, Kenny's 8th Olympic medal, still saw him enter the record books, tied with Sir Bradley Wiggins as Britain's most decorated Olympian. Not to be outdone, wife Laura took silver behind a dominant Germany in the team pursuit, alongside Katie Archibald, Nia Evans and Josie Knight, her 5th Olympic honour. That family trophy cabinet must be groaning under the weight of those medals, and there could yet be more. Natalie Perks, BBC News, Tokyo.
Simone Biles, the most decorated US gymnast of all time, says she's very proud of herself after winning bronze in the beam final. It's seen as a hugely impressive comeback for the 24-year-old, who's not taken part in many events during the Tokyo Games because she was dealing with mental health issues. Our sports editor Dan Rowan now reports from Tokyo.
Here she is, Simone Biles, you can hear
It was the welcome back Tokyo had been waiting for. Simone Biles returning to competition earlier, a week after the world's greatest gymnast stunned the sport by pulling out of the team finals to focus on her mental health.
She's broken boundaries in every level.
Having sat out 4 other events, her Olympics looked to be over. But today, on the balance beam, a final chance to remind these games what they'd been missing.
Beautiful triple spin, she moves with such speed.
Biles said she'd suffered from what gymnasts call the twisties, a mental block in which they lose their sense of orientation. But having amended her routine, the US superstar held her nerve.
Needs now this great dismount. So here, we'll flip to 1, flip to 2, double pike, just like a jump off.
And so Simone Biles is back. Her series of withdrawals and now subsequent return here this evening is arguably the story of these games. One that has been a landmark moment when it comes to raising awareness of the pressures that athletes are under, even the greatest athletes, regardless of whether or not she wins a medal tonight.
The smile had said it all, the sense of relief obvious. It had been enough to put her into silver position.
Going for gold.
Chinese sensation 16-year-old Guan Chen top scored, pushing Biles back into bronze. But this felt like a victory after one of the toughest weeks of her career.
I was so nervous, but it just means the world that I can come out here and compete one more time before this Games is over. On the other ones, I physically couldn't twist in the air. I would just keep crashing, and I just wasn't cleared safely to do those things. Mine's not there.
As well as praise, Biles had faced some criticism for deciding not to compete after losing her bearings during this vault last week. But one of her former teammates says her impact goes well beyond her 7th Olympic medal.
She is someone that has transcended gymnastics, made it mainstream. She's allowed people to engage and follow it. And I think that her legacy will live beyond sports with what she's done this weekend. So, I mean, it's made a bigger impact than if she would have won all 5 medals.
These games, perhaps her last, did not turn out as Biles had expected. But her 7th Olympic medal may prove to be the one she's most proud of. Dan Rowan, BBC News, Tokyo.
The athlete Karsten Warholm of Norway has had a stunning day. He won gold in the 400 metres hurdles. And in the process, he destroyed his own previous world record. He said after the race that it hadn't quite sunk in yet, but he felt ecstatic. With more on that and some of the day's other achievements, here's our correspondent Andy Swiss.
I cannot believe what we've just seen. Not so much rewriting the record books as ripping them to pieces. The Olympics have seen some remarkable feats over the years, but nothing like Karsten Warholm's. The Norwegian was favourite to win the 400 metres hurdles, but something extraordinary was happening. World records are supposed to get beaten by fractions. This was on a different planet. Warholm is going to go away to take the win. It's gold for Norway. 45.94. A shirt-shredding, jaw-dropping moment. He'd smashed his old record by the best part of a second. And if the world was in wonder, well, so was he.
I can't believe the time. A lot of time I've been asked about the perfect race. I said it didn't exist. But this is the closest thing I've ever come.
Commentators, meanwhile, were left reaching for the superlatives.
That performance by Karsten Warholm is possibly the best I've ever seen.
For many, Usain Bolt's blistering 100 metres record of 9.58 had been the pinnacle of athletics, but now that famous landmark has a rival.
We always felt there was potentially an opportunity for Usain to go a little bit quicker. This world record, I just think, has just been taken so far out of the norm, the normal realms, and that's why I think it's so incredible.
But he wasn't the only history maker, as the women's 100 metres champion Elaine Thompson-Herah took the 200 metres. She's beginning to come away, she's going to make it a double! It's the second games in a row she's won both sprints, the Jamaican becoming the first woman to clinch the so-called double-double. And there was more success for Britain. In the boxing, Pat McCormack had to settle for silver after losing his welterweight final. While in the diving, there was a bronze for Jack Law. Law later revealed he'd considered retiring earlier this year because of mental health issues. This, he said, was redemption. Andy Swiss, BBC News.
So let's take a quick look at the medal table after 11 days of competition. After all those medals today, in the sailing, cycling, boxing, diving and on the track, Team GB are currently in 6th place with a total of 43 medals. Now, in Scotland, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has announced that most COVID restrictions will be lifted next Monday. The picture across the UK, according to the latest official figures, shows that there were 21,691 new cases of coronavirus in the latest 24-hour period. And that is the 5th day in a row that the numbers have fallen. Hospitalisations have also decreased. So does this mean that the trend is now firmly downwards and that more optimism is justified? Our health editor Huw Pym has been taking a look at the figures and what they could mean, and a warning there is some flash photography in the report.
Remember this? Nightclubs opening up in England on July the 19th, along with the ending of remaining legal restrictions. Scientists had predicted this would fuel the spread of the virus with more cases, but it hasn't happened. In fact, they've gone the other way. Now, one of the experts who expected case increases says it's come as a surprise.
All the indications now are that there was a real reduction in cases, particularly in adults between 20 and 40 years old. COVID's had a habit of surprising us, and this is a good surprise for a change. I'd like to understand it better, that's for sure.
And as people enjoyed themselves in Musselburgh near Edinburgh today, the Scottish Government said almost all restrictions would end next Monday, with nightclubs reopening and social distancing dropped in most settings, though face coverings in enclosed spaces will remain. Daily reported cases did go above 50,000 in mid-July, though not as high as the January peak, and have fallen back to around 26,000 on the 7-day rolling average. The decline in cases actually started soon after the opening up in England on July the 19th. Health officials acknowledge gatherings of people to watch the Euros football caused some spikes in infections, which might have pushed up case rates more than expected before July the 19th. Since then, it seems, even with new freedoms, people have remained cautious, for example with mask wearing, and that could have been a factor in curbing the spread of the virus.
we have perhaps assumed that people would go slightly more back to normal than they actually have. And I think probably what's happening is that a lot of people are being a little bit more cautious in terms of returning to normal, which is why what we're seeing is probably on the slightly lower end of some of the modelling forecasts.
So what does all this mean for the NHS? There were fears that hospitals would come under intensifying pressure this month as infections continued rising. Here's what's been happening with daily COVID hospital admissions. They started rising quite sharply in late June and right through July, though they do appear recently to have levelled off a bit and are not accelerating at the rate which some experts had predicted. The vaccination rollout has played a major part. Nearly 89% of adults have now had a first dose and 73% have had both jabs. There was a reminder of the tragic COVID toll today, with more than 100 deaths reported, reflecting cases first identified a few weeks ago. But there's a growing consensus that there won't be another surge as a result of the opening up in England last month. Huw Edwards, BBC News.
The United Nations says at least 40 Afghan civilians have been killed in intense fighting in the past 24 hours as the Taliban and government forces battle for control of the capital of Helmand province. It said thousands of people in Lashkar have been displaced. The UN also highlighted concerns about people's homes being occupied by fighters. We can talk now to our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, who's in Kabul tonight. Lise, what is your reading of the situation there?
Well, Huw, as this night began, a senior military source said to me the skies are clear tonight. In other words, now is the time to unleash an operation to clear Taliban from the provincial capital, Lashkar, in a campaign led by a ferocious bombing by Afghan forces, still backed up by US air power as well as drones. And that is why the commanding officer in Helmand, the British-educated General Sami Sadat, urge residents today to leave the city. But these are terrifying times for the residents of Lashkar, in fact, all of Helmand province, where people have been hiding in their homes, nowhere else to go, nowhere to hide, to escape the gunfire. And these are deeply uncertain times right across Afghanistan, including here in Kabul tonight, where a powerful car bomb suddenly exploded outside the home of the defence minister, right next to the highly protected enclave, which houses most of the embassies and government officials. The attackers moved into his villa, provoking a gun battle lasting more than 3 hours. So tonight, Kabul was shattered by the sounds of suicide vests exploding, small arms gunfire, and it was competing with another event that Afghans had been taking to their rooftops to shout Allahu Akbar in support of Afghan government forces. With every day, this war changes shape and gets worse.
Lise, many thanks again. Lise Doucette, our chief international correspondent, with the latest on the situation in Kabul. Now, the number of drug-related deaths in England and Wales has reached the highest level since records began nearly 30 years ago. There were over 4,500 deaths linked to drug abuse registered in 2020, according to the Office for National Statistics. But delays in registration caused by the pandemic mean that around half the deaths reported happened, in fact, in 2019. The record figures for Scotland were published last week. Now, the latest figures for England and Wales represent a 3.8% increase on the previous year. The trade in illegal drugs has increasingly been blamed for rising levels of violence in towns and cities across Britain. In the seaside community of Rhyl in North Wales, research by BBC News shows that violent crime increased for 4 years before the pandemic struck, with drug gangs playing a significant part, as our social affairs correspondent Michael Buchanan tells us.
They caught 3 people injecting there the other day.
Weekend patrol in the most violent neighbourhood in Wales.
He said he was going to pinch me. I did not step forward.
Right, look, we're not going anywhere.
As COVID restrictions ease, there's fear here as elsewhere that serious crime will increase. Violent crime for a long time in Rhyl was linked to the nighttime economy. Assaults and beatings and stabbings, a consequence of drinking too much, often at the weekend. But in recent years, the nature of violence here has changed dramatically. The town is plagued by so-called county lines, gangs from big cities importing violence as they battle for control of the drugs market.
When we get rid of one county line, then another will pop up.
This car chase ended with feuding criminals murdering a local man, the drugs trade killing both users and dealers.
These are vulnerable people, they exploit them, they look to get them hooked on drugs, and when they can't pay for them, they look to encourage them to commit violence themselves or to deal on their behalf.
I hear it all the time around Rhyl. Drug selling, sometimes stabbings.
In Rhyl's poorest neighbourhood, this club offers an alternative.
Good, Maggie.
Self-defence, discipline, and perhaps most importantly, resilience.
We try and get the youngsters off the street. We stop them having peer pressure. We give them confidence so they can say no to drugs and things like that. And we try and teach them to be respectful and disciplined.
There is broad agreement that offering these youngsters a future, reducing the harm from drugs and violence, begins by instilling ambition.
It's one of the key ways out of deprivation for me is education. To start with people at the youngest. So we have invested nearly 50 million in the school facilities in Rhyl in order that those young people feel that we've got pride and provide the opportunity for them to reach their potential.
The police accept they can't arrest their way out of Rhyl's problems.
I mean, they're about the only two lights.
Only investment in the root causes of drug addiction and crime, they say, will make a long-term difference. Michael Buchanan, BBC News, Rhyl.
Before we go, some time for some more Olympic news, because tomorrow morning, Team GB's youngest ever summer Olympian will be competing. Skateboarder Sky Brown turned 13 just last month, and Natalie Perks has been to meet her.
We first met a long time ago and we talked about this dream, and now you're here. Yeah. What does it feel like?
It's insane. It's unbelievable. It's so cool to be here. And at the village, there's like all different kinds of people, like super tall people and like super strong people.
Was there a moment where you thought, the Olympics isn't going to happen?
I thought maybe it wouldn't happen. I was like crushed. I was a little bummed, but people's lives are more important. So I thought about that and got through it.
You and I last spoke after a really serious accident that you'd had.
Yeah, that was definitely a heavy time for, my parents, my family, and it was bad. But I really think the accident made me want to go harder and, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
And so how important is it for you to have your dad here with you?
Oh, it's really nice. I'm still pretty young, and it's nice to have someone here to look after me, and it'll be hard without my dad.
You are going to make history for Britain. Has that sank in? What does that mean to you?
It was my dream to be one of the youngest in there and, show girls that it doesn't matter how old or young you are, you can do anything,
We've seen you win some big events in the last year since we last saw you. How much confidence has that given you?
I'm feeling good and I can't wait. I'm going to really try to get on the podium, we'll get a medal, get a gold hopefully, but no matter what happens, I just want to inspire girls around the world, and hopefully they will see, this little girl here and oh, if she can do it, I can do it too. That's my goal. That's why I want to be in the Olympics.
And very best of luck to Sky tomorrow. That's it from us. Now on BBC One, it's time to join our news teams where you are. Have a good night.